Greetings to Jamie and everybody, and to all the panelists and all the people who are currently connected. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be able to share this space with you in representation of the Ecuadorian provincial governments. For us, it's very important to let you know our experience in how the transfer system is working in Ecuador, from the national to the subnational governments, and especially show you how through our new constitution in the year 2008, we were able to come up with a framework more in terms of decentralizations in Ecuador. So I don't know if I would like to share my screen. I just wanted to share our experience in terms of the international transferences. We are aware that through these transfers, we can manage that the local governments and join a national plan, a national development plan with these transfers. And the Ecuadorian plan, it's from 2021 through 2025 with 5 key axes. We have 16 objectives, 55 policies, and 130 goals. And this national development plan has been articulated with the objectives of worldwide development, the 17 ODSs, and the 2030 agenda as well. What are we doing from the local governments, or what are we doing at a local level here in Ecuador? In terms of local governments, we are in charge of these functions in Ecuador. It's international cooperation, transit, transport, and vital security, preserve, maintain, and the architectural and cultural patrimony, hydraulic cleaning, reforestation and forestation, road construction and planning at a local level, not the national level, but the local road planning, also environmental management, also fire mitigation, productive ferment, and also the development of tourism. Everything else, healthcare, security, and all other aspects are national agendas. We as local governments only have these functions and these competences that I just shared with you. Everything else, especially the healthcare system, is in charge of the central government. Educational system, even the universities are in charge of the national government. And also national security is in charge of the national government as well. With this in mind, I would like to share with you how we have transferred the resources for these functions for the subnational governments. Subnational governments are divided in 3 prefectures, what we know as regional governments or states in other countries. We have municipalities that are smaller governments, and we also have a very much smaller governments, where the parochial governments that are community governments, especially in rural areas from the cities or the provinces. In Ecuador, before the new constitution in 2008, and I would like to mark a threshold because it's before and after this constitution, because we could organize the state much better. We were able to identify a decentralization model, and before that constitution in 2008, you will be able to see that we have 14 laws for resources allocations for subnational governments. So it was very complex because we had to identify every single one of those laws for each allocation. And based on those 14 laws or policies, we needed to allocate the funds for the local governments. But from 2008, we were able to reorganize the state with a decentralization model. And after the constitution, we issue a very important law for subnational governments in Jota in 2010, and that establishes a territorial equity model under a local development view to generate several development focus points across the country, and that offers a system of territorial equality system that allows to allocate the funds across the local governments. This is very important because here in Ecuador, we have a lot of natural resources and also oil resources. And with this constitution, there was an before and after, because due to the gathering of those oil and mineral resources, we could establish that the local governments can receive part of those resources that are being exploited in those territories to be invested in those same territories. And before that constitution, that didn't happen in Ecuador. Everything was going to the central government arcs, and the local governments were not receiving anything at all from those resources at all. So we established from the new composition of the allocation. We were able to structure that from the constitution. And in this chart, you are able to see how the allocations are structured to the local governments. This is the territorial equity model that allows us to establish the 3 levels of subnational governments. Prefectures are receiving 27% of the resources, 67% it's the municipalities, and the community governments, rural governments, is just the 6%. So there are 23 prefectures, albeit for Galapagos, that doesn't have a prefecture. So from the revenue, from the permanent revenue that the central government is receiving, the 21% of those permanent revenue are received through tax collection, especially VAT and special consumption and rent. And from the total of the income, the 21% is to these 3 local governments: prefectures, municipalities, and parochial governments. And the other percentage of the non-permanent revenue, because oil has a fluctuation, so it is considered as non-permanent, that are not received in a permanent basis. And also the 10% of that income is also destined to these local governments. So it's around 31% of the total revenue, which is allocated to local government. There's a policy established in 2010 that there is a fixed amount. It's around $2 billion that are allocated at a local government, subnational government basis, and there's a variable amount, and the difference between the 21% of permanent revenue, the 10% of the non-permanent, plus amount A, which is distributed based on some criteria, local criteria, like population, density, basic needs, the progress or the achievements in improvement or of the quality of life at different levels. If there's any tax incentive that we are calculated in. If there's an optimization effort, there's also an incentive there. And if those goals are being met, there's also an incentive of a 10% if the goals are being met. So those are the variable amounts that we deliver to the local governments based on this criteria. That's how we have been delivering the resources from the year 2011 to 2023. And the fixed amounts basically are $2,136 million, that's what the subnational governments are receiving from the permanent income, and the variable amount is in function of the criteria that I mentioned before. In 2023, the subnational governments have been received $3,137 million for the development of their local functions. And those are distributed in the following manner. As I was telling, out of the $3 billion, the provinces, let's say that those are the bigger structures, like the states in other countries, are receiving $898 million. The municipalities are receiving $2,007 million, and the rural governments, that are the smaller governments, especially are receiving $188 million. So this has been decreasing this year due to the adjustments of the variable amounts according to the structure that we established for resource allocation. The criteria that we use to deliver the resources are socio-demographic criteria, and what has to do with the subnational management represents the 26% of revenue. And this can be a limitation in terms of the first reflections that we had in this, because I also think that the main autonomy of local government is the financial autonomy. And when you don't have the capacity to have that financial autonomy, you depend a lot on the central government, and these are the dependent levels of the central government. I wanted to share with you how this has evolved in the last 13 years. The revenue in subnational governments in millions of dollars. The prefectures in the last 30 years, it's $9 billion. Municipalities, $25 billion. And the community governments is $2 billion. And there's a special regime that it's in Galapagos is $227 million. And in terms of dependency of fiscal resources, this could be a nice reflection for this space. One of the main limitations of the subnational governments is that we depend on an 86% of the national budgets, and our capacity of revenue, it's very, very small at a local level, especially in terms of functions that local governments have. Here you're able to see that the dependency in 2022, it was an 86% for prefectures, for the bigger governments. In 2021, it was 87%, 2020 was 87%. We are heavily dependent on the central government, especially especially in the prefectures or the state level governments. The municipalities have the ability to have more income, but the community governments, the smaller and the bigger levels of governments have that limitation of generating their own resources. And I also wanted to present to you the composition of the expenditure, at least at the state level. of the prefectures that have municipalities within those prefectures. So from the budget, the investment, it's 81%, the public investment. Financing is just 8%, and expenditure or the it's only the 11%. So provinces have a great capacity to generate their investment models of public at a very high degree, 81%. Basically, the resources that are received are for public investment, and only 11% is for expenditure. And this is the distribution of those budgets that are received from the central government in the prefectures or the state level governance. So 63% is to the roads functionality. So it's local roads that it's addressed by local governments. 10% for sewers. 8% is for agriculture, 8% is for other functions, 5% for human rights, and 3% planification and environment, another 3%. I wanted to draw the following conclusion from this, is that for us it's very important to deepen in these models that allow us to generate resources at a local level, because that's one of the bigger challenges that we have at subnational governments, to be able to fulfill the competences, since the central government is in charge of health and education and all of those bigger structures. We are lacking ways to generate revenue at a local level. The municipalities have some taxes, but at a state level, we are struggling to generate those resources. And the community governments, the rural governments, the very small governments, have even more challenges to generate their own resources. And another interesting reflection is that decentralization of our country, even though we have the Constitution of 2008, is not dependent on fiscal aspects only, but it also has to do with the process of administrative decentralization process, because we need an agreement of fiscal decentralization here in Ecuador. And one of the other conclusions that we had with this assessment of the subnational income has to do with operativity of fiscal decentralization through different types of transfers that needs to be assessed considering the fiscal connotation and social connotations that are expected in the criteria of distribution. We are looking to have a more equal process of assignations, and my last conclusion would be that the possibility to access to finances from local governments. And this is just a reflection for this discussion at a global level. When we see that the cost of money in some countries ends up being too high, we have the local government banks with an 8% for financing in dollars, knowing that there are multilateral or bilateral cooperation organisms that have 2 or 3% interest rates in dollars. But it turns out that when subnational governments want to have financing for projects focused on goals and development objectives, it turns out that the financing is in 8% in dollars. So basically, there are a lot of obstacles, especially at a national level, to access financing or for the subnational governments, because there's no guarantee from the government to access those funds. So perhaps that's one of the challenges that we have as subnational governments, to be able to remove those barriers or those obstacles so we could access directly to those financing lines to fund the development projects that we want to achieve. So those are the three challenges that we've established, or those are the three transition models that we are turning towards at a global level at the rural and urban transition. So two, by 2050, two-thirds of the population is going to be on the urban areas, because we haven't been able to establish a structure for the rural areas. So we have that challenge to access affordable financing to make progress in social and green transition, that are key issues to guarantee a sustainable development model. And the third issue that we have is a productive transition and sustainable, including different factors like the circular economy, and also a productive transition model that could leverage concepts like social and economy that have been recognized or acknowledged by the United Nations as a valid model to close the gaps through a social economy model. But to be able to meet those three objectives, we have to democratize the access to credits, and not a credit at any expense, but addressing those three elements that have to do with the future of the world, to be able to access credit lines with affordable interest rates according to the reality of those local governments, and in accordance to those three elements. I mean, it's just unfeasible that we have credits available for development at 8% interest rate. So I just leave it on the table to reflect on this and to see how we can implement some actions to close that gap and to abide to those three principles that I spoke before. Thank you very much.